a certified life coach with 45 years combined experience in human resources, Jen Trum and Katherine Fry have both experienced the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, both personally and professionally. What they both know to be true is this: our mental, physical, and emotional health are the essential building blocks in order to thrive and shine in the field of HR. In a first of its kind podcast, we'll be getting real and we'll discuss and share what has contributed to both our success and struggles, with the goal of inspiring women around the globe to stand tall and take the necessary action to both thrive and shine in HR. Here are your hosts, Jen and Katherine.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Thrive and Shine HR. I am Jen, and this is Katherine. Hello, Katherine. How are we doing today?
I am so great, Jen. How are you today?
Doing amazing. We are on episode 14, if you can believe it. It feels like, in some ways, it feels like it's our first, and in some ways, it feels like 100.
I know.
Today, we are going to be talking about love it or leave it, whether or not you stay or go in HR. So it's going to be a big one today. But before we get going, Katherine, tell us a little bit about what was the best part of your weekend, since we record on Mondays. Would love to kind of check in and see how things are going with you.
Oh, my weekend. So I was down with a client in Telluride, Colorado, last week, and I was on my way home. Okay, so this is like 2:00 on Friday, and I came to a fork in the road, and my colleague, the HR woman that I work with, was telling me she was going to Moab. So I got to this crossroads, and I was like, I think Moab is to the left, home is to the right. And it wasn't like in the movies, where it was this really clean turn to the left. I sat at this stop sign, and then I started driving home, and I was like, no, don't do that. There's 12 inches of snow coming this weekend. What are you doing? So then it was a really awkward, like, left-hand turn. I had to pull over on the side of the road and do one of my coaching clients. And I totally outed myself. I was like, listen, I am poaching internet from a grocery store in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, because I just decided to go to Moab for the weekend with the clothes I have on my back. So I did something very spontaneous, and I rode my bike. I had my bike with me, so I rode my bike all weekend, and I went on trail runs all weekend, and I dodged rainstorms, and then I came home to a ton of snow back in Colorado. So I had a fantastic weekend. It was a reset, and it was almost an impromptu retreat for my business. I really, really needed some time away to step back and say, okay, what are your priorities as we head into the rest of the year? So it was actually really cool. Very therapeutic, personally and professionally. It was wild. What about you?
That's awesome. You know what that reminds me of? And I'm sitting here trying to remember the name of this freaking movie as you're telling the story. But do you remember the movie with Tom Hanks and the ball, and he crash lands? Do you remember that movie?
Wilson. Okay. Yeah, yes. He's on the desert island.
Yes. Well, at the very end of the movie, there's like this powerful scene. It's actually the scene my dad loves the most in this movie, where he's sitting at a crossroads in the road, and he decides like to turn one way or another based on his future and what he's been through in the past. And it's like, as you're telling this story, it's like, whoa, that's kind of a like profound Wilson Tom Hanks moment. But yeah, no,
I love that movie.
An incredible weekend. I'm exhausted. I'm tired, but I had so much fun. So me and a friend of mine traveled 4 hours to go to TED Talks up in Portland. So I live up in Southern Oregon. We went up to Portland and we saw TEDx for a full day. It was TED Talks, and never done anything like that before. She and I, on a whim, just said, hey, do you want to do this thing? So we did, and it was incredible. It was
I love that.
Fun and like so outside of my comfort zone, and like, yeah, it just it really opened me up to so many different things that I
Uh,
hadn't been open to before. And I actually, as we were driving back home the other day, I had told her, I'm like, I'm going to ask my boss whether or not he would be open next year to actually getting a bus of people to
oh,
go and see TED Talks. Because literally, I don't know how much, TEDx is in your area, listeners, but it was only $100 a ticket in Portland to be able to see a full day of
whoa.
TED Talks. And it was beyond just talks of people all day. It was actually like, it was a whole event where you got a free book, you got to meet the presenters, you
Uh,
got to have all these taste testings of alcoholic and non-alcoholic. And it was just amazing. It was so much fun. So I had a blast, and definitely I came back fully inspired.
wow. I love that. Just an immersion in having your brain think a little bit differently. That's so fun.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So, well, let's do this. Let's
Let's do
get
this.
into today. So, we're going to talk about something that so many of us have contemplated, and that's getting the F out of HR. And it's something that realistically is a real thing for so many of us. And I know you and I, Catherine, when we did our prep yesterday evening, we both were like, where do we start on stories
Oh
that
gosh.
we have that actually are going to be relatable to this topic? Because it's so real, especially in terms of like you and I and how we pushed against HR and now found our way back to it. So, well, why don't we dig in and ask the first question? So,
I love
have
it.
you, Catherine, have ever been so dissatisfied with your career in HR that you contemplated leaving the profession?
Yes. Yes, Jen. Yeah,
Tell us a little bit about that, Catherine.
sorry, I saw your finger up against your face and I thought you were flicking me off. I was like, wait, what did I say wrong? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It was your pointing finger. Um, I I did I feel like I did leave the profession. I left the traditional 9 to 5 profession a couple of years ago. And it was two-part. It had been a result of compounding interest of things that had happened to me over the course of my 25 years in a traditional 9 to 5 role. Um, it was just all of the things. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But yes, I decided to become a women's empowerment coach. I blew out my ACL a couple of years ago, and it was my first time on FMLA. And I read Jack Canfield's book, The Success Principles. That was the first book I read, and I had 9 months to. I live in Colorado, so all we do, a big part of our livelihood out here is recreating in the great outdoors and connecting with nature. And I'm an ultra runner, and I mountain bike, and I ski, and I go uphill, and we do all these things. And instead of doing those things on the weekend, I decided to do what I call brain rehab because I was so dissatisfied with my career. And, I was this international HR person. I had decided to give back to my community and start working in HR as their first ever HR professional. And kind of like Jen, what you were saying last week, from day one, I knew it wasn't a good fit.
Mm.
And I fought it and I fought it and I fought it. And I stayed there
Sometimes we do know.
oh my gosh. I stayed there for 5 years. And I was not a fit for the organization. I'm absolutely a fit for HR. I was not a fit for that particular organization. So yeah, I blew out my knee. I decided to become a women's empowerment coach, and I was out. I was out. Jen, what about you?
Oh my gosh. Well, when we were talking about this last night, I'm like, well, let me count the ways. Which one do I choose? Right. So I think for me, it was a progression of dissatisfaction
Yeah.
over many, many years. And I
Yes.
had several different examples, but absolutely, even in the notes when we created the notes for the episode, and I
Yeah.
had that question as the question that we were going to use, all the only answer I had was like yes with 3 exclamation points. I'm like, No problem. But I think the one that sticks out for me is when I finally thought I was pushing away from HR the hardest. And that's when
Uh-huh.
I too decided to go into coaching. And originally, when I was going to go into coaching, I had zero, I mean, zero interest to do anything with with the
Yeah.
field of human resources. I was so clear in my head that I wanted nothing to do with it, right? I was burnt out. I was
Hmm.
exhausted. I
Hmm.
felt bitter, right? Like, they say in HR, we talk about it, I remember all the time, right? Like it turns you dark and cold and all these things that, is part of like the vernacular of being in HR. And that was me when I got to 2021 and I was finally ready to like step out and go into coaching. I was like, okay, like I was so ready to be done with HR. And
Yeah.
and yet, like when I first went into being a coach, I was putting myself out there in all these different ways and, trying this audience and this niche and this thing. And then, what ended up happening is several months later, I had a coach who I was working with, and over again, they kept kind of flipping the mirror around on me and saying, Jen, you were
Mm.
meant to serve you.
Yes.
You were meant
Yes.
to serve you. And
Yes.
when that happened, it kind of changed everything in terms of like, one, who I know I'm meant to serve, but also my relationship with HR. And like when that happened, and I realized through like the coaching and through the thought work and through all
Mhm.
of that, that really all that time, all those years when I was building in the bitterness and the resentment and everything,
Yes.
it was me.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it was me. It was everything I was holding on to and unwilling to really own about myself. And so I could go down a slippery slope with that one. But I think that realization alone was one of the most powerful in my life. And it really then helped just solidify who I'm meant to serve, but also like the community that I'm meant to belong in.
Mhm.
And so it's been kind of a really powerful and a beautiful journey, I think, for me. So, okay, that was like way too much. I'm like, oh,
No, I love that. I love that because I completely agree. We talked about this a little bit last night about, an identity as being a woman specifically in human
Mhm.
resources. And, you know, eh, I could go in a million different directions with this, but I do believe it takes a certain type of woman to thrive in HR. It
Mhm.
takes a very strong, resilient, committed, loving, compassionate woman. So, similarly, I identify with that, and I'm very proud to surround myself with like minded women. And yet, we're all women, and we've been socialized in a certain way that leads to us getting in our way. And I think it takes some time. I think it does take age and wisdom to see that. And you and I
Mhm.
have arrived at similar places around the same age. So it's just really
Yeah.
fascinating. Always a pleasure to talk with you about this stuff.
I know, it's so rad.
It's rad.
It is so rad where I'm like, wow, how aligned it is. And I think the more that you and I talk about it, the more I hear others who have similar
Oh my
stories to
gosh.
tell, but we've been holding on to it for so long
Oh
that
yeah.
now it's kind of start to percolate up in ways
Oh
that
yeah.
feel a lot of fun to talk about. All right, question two. So now let's go in a little bit. Share a pivotal moment which led to you addressing your dissatisfaction with HR.
Oh boy. Honestly, it was a series. I alluded to, and I didn't allude to it. I straight up said it. It's been a series of moments. Um, from having a former female boss. I mean, this is decades ago. Say to me that HR is to serve the organization only. HR doesn't serve both the employee and the organization. And I had a very visceral reaction to that because I believe that HR serves both.
Mhm.
So I thought, why is my profession so misunderstood? And why can't it be so black and white like finance? You do
Mhm.
finance a certain way, right?
Mhm.
And this misinterpretation from different organizational leaders, I think makes HR a very, very fascinating field. So it's just been a series of things like that. 9/11, when I had to let go of 11 people, the Great Resignation, the Great Recession, when I let go of 110 people, and then when COVID happened. So it was just a series of things. And what I realized is my dissatisfaction, my personal dissatisfaction with HR really came down to when things were out of my control, but they were larger organizational consternation. It wasn't the one-on-ones. It wasn't employee relations. It wasn't the terminations. I've mentioned before that I had 5 deaths in 5 years. And I worked for a mid-sized employer, so I knew these people personally and intimately. And even with those one-on-one situations, that really wasn't dissatisfaction. Was it hard? Oh, yeah. But it was the part that I found rewarding. So for me, the dissatisfaction came at that organizational level, which is interesting. So just being able to distinguish between the two also really led to where I am today. So very, very grateful that I was able to see that so very clearly after 25 years.
Yeah.
What about you? Did you have a pivotal moment?
I did. I would say I
Ooh.
did have a pivotal moment. So when a couple weeks ago, when we had the episode on loneliness, I had talked about when we first moved up to this small area in Southern Oregon
Yeah.
and ended up kind of in this position where I ended up having to do a lot of layoffs and just feeling so lonely. What I didn't end up talking too much about is like the position that I ended up taking to kind of get, I talked a little bit about it, but it was in, that a warehouse environment that had dark rooms. And so it was a 24-hour plan that I ended up taking as a role from, the layoffs that I did and just taking whatever I could get. And what was so interesting about that position was the disconnect between the plant itself here in Little Southern Oregon and
Uh-huh.
the home office in New York, and the lack of really support. And so as an HR person, that was something that was a huge shake in my life around why would I come into a field, into a profession, and then be so powerless, because very quickly off, this environment being so unique to anything I'd ever worked in before, this was one of the first times where I really was building very quickly some solid relationships with the leaders within this organization, because they really needed to feel heard and seen. And it was like something that was like, almost, you said the word visceral earlier. And it was like, I can remember when I first came into that organization, how much they needed somebody. They needed the support.
Ah.
They needed to feel heard. They needed, because, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, is because it was like film. They did a film for like x-rays. All of the rooms that a lot of these people worked in were completely dark, and the only light they had was in the break area and when you clock in and out, and that's pretty much it. So there was not a lot of like engaging stuff around to help people feel connected to one another. And
Yeah.
so that was my goal right from the start when I came into work at this organization. And yet, time after time after time, the corporate office wanted to hear nothing of it. And not only that, at the end of that first year that I was there, I'd been there like 4 or 5 months, they slashed the budget by half in terms of us having the ability to be able
Oh.
to do cultural things, connection things, community type things. And within the next like few weeks to month after that was like my rock bottom of HR, of being in HR, of like, why in the world would I want to be in a profession where everybody around me in this environment I am here to serve feels unseen, unheard, and unvalued.
Mhm.
And so from that point, that was the first time that I jumped ship from HR to becoming a consultant. And then I came back, and then, in and out, and then talked earlier about when I left the final time, but or not the final time, I'm in it again. I'm like, Jesus Christ, Jen. But it was so impactful to me in such a pivotal moment
Yeah.
because I think we in HR struggle with this all the time, all the time, because that's our why. I know for me, that was my why of getting into HR. It was finally the click of wanting to get in a profession where I could be this person to serve, like you said, like that
Yeah.
leader who told you you're here to serve the organization, not the employees. Huge, huge red flag, right? For you at that time. But yet, 20 plus years ago, we didn't necessarily have the courage or even the awareness to be able to say, that's not okay. Right?
Right.
That's not what I'm about. That does not, yeah. And so all of those things, I think over time now being able to reflect back on that was like 11 years ago for me
Right.
that happened. I can look
Right.
back and know fully I would have been able to engage in that situation differently. But I think it was meant to serve me and fuel me in so many ways now that I am here, in this environment to be able to help others
Yes.
be able to see, hey, you know what, not
Yes.
only are you not alone, but your voice matters as that HR
Yes.
person. And so if it's not going to be in that environment, and that's what it was for me, I had to leave. They were absolutely unwilling to hear anything I had to say. And so that was not an environment I was going to serve in, it was not going
Right.
to serve anybody. So as sad and hard as that was to leave all those leaders, and I know all the HR people out there who are struggle with leaving that toxic environment because of all the people that they care about, that
Mhm.
is one of those things I am here to tell you is worth it. Because I still
Mm.
run into some of the leaders that I worked with at that plant at Costco or at, Fred Meyer or wherever, and they appreciate that I cared, that I
Mm.
couldn't, I couldn't make that change that was needed at that time. And thankfully, things ended up shifting and evolving through new leadership in the organization several years later. But they recognized that there was somebody that cared. And that's, I think, what truly sometimes matters. And we don't always realize. So, okay, well, that went off on a major tangent, but like so important, I think, to see when those major pivotal memories, I think, can really help serve as a catalyst for not only our own change, but to help us and helping others to see how they can make change.
I'm
Oh,
I'm getting I'm getting a little emotional because when you've been in the profession as long as you and I have been in, you do run into people years later,
yeah.
serendipitously,
Yeah.
intentionally. And I think about the employees, who have said, Kathy, when I worked for an international organization and I did a training. I went to every single office and did a training on crucial conversations. And I've had employees reach out to me years and years and years later saying, that really changed my life. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I may start crying. The spouses of my deceased coworkers who I have formed friendships with to this day, when they say, thank you so much for being there, thank you for coming to our home, thank you for just continuing to care about us months and years later. I think that's one of the reasons why so many of us are attracted to this profession, because
Mhm.
we want to help. And for me, just knowing I've made a difference, sometimes it doesn't happen immediately and you don't see it immediately and you don't feel it immediately. It comes years later.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know. I just felt compelled to share that for some reason, because
Yeah.
similarly to what you were saying, um, our profession, when it comes down to how we're showing up in the profession, that is our power and that's what's in our control. And that's the beautiful part.
Yeah. It really is. And yet, I think you and I fooled ourselves into thinking because that organization was unwilling to listen or to hear or to give or to support, that then meant we were failing in the profession. Because I think,
Totally.
we put ourselves in this role, right, of being the being the advocate and the ambassador. And when that fails at no fault of our own, because we're in this helpless position, that I mean, I can look back and just feel so much shame and
Mm,
embarrassment and
mm,
sadness. And,
mm.
because it's like, I wish, but that then does come back around. It really
Yeah.
does. When you do meet up with those people years
Yeah.
later, or, find those serendipitous moments, yeah, just having the heart to be there and to show up, even when you didn't have the control to change anything, is a superpower. And that's the one gift I think so many of us, myself included, I'm gonna cry too, but we didn't realize. We then felt like that lack of control
Right.
meant that we were out of control. And,
Right.
with a little awareness and with a little
Yeah.
grounding, we can actually show up in a different way. And so that actually leads me to the next question, because I think
Oh,
now
good.
as coaches, we can like see and be able to differentiate how did I read this? Like, how do we and how did we how can we differentiate the day-to-day challenges that we have in human resources with our bosses, with the organization, with the tediousness of some of the tasks within the role,
Yeah.
versus it may be time to actually make a major shift in career direction. So how do you, or how did you, how has that differentiation come up for you?
I thought about this a lot after we did our prep last night, and I woke up thinking about this morning. And yes, HR is hard. Yes. Do we sometimes fantasize about wanting to leave? Yes. The big difference for me was when I blew out my ACL. I was on FMLA. I was trying to figure out, am I going to stay or am I going to go? Literally, when I blew out my knee, my first thought was, thank God, because I knew I was having surgery and I was that's how burned out I was. I was like, thank God I don't have to go to work for a couple of weeks. That is how burned out I was. I would rather be on a surgical table, knocked out, and having my knee torn apart and sewn back together. That is how burned out I was. Okay.
Oh
Like
my
straight up burned out. And when I was recovering and I was doing my what I call brain rehab, I went back to coaching school. So I was in the middle of my coaching program. And instead of recreating and being out and doing all the things I love to do that I normally do, I purchased an app platform. And I was like, I'm going to make an app for women. Right. Because I was like getting really excited about coaching. I wanted to be a women's empowerment coach. So I created my first 6-week challenge. Okay. My first online program.
Uh-huh.
I was still back in HR. I was recovering from knee surgery, all the things. And I loved it. I loved getting into this app. I loved creating these challenges. And I was using all the things I was learning in coaching school. And I, threw it out on social media. The first time I ever did a live Facebook, I was like scared out of my mind. This is a couple of years ago now. And I was like, I'm going to be doing a first ever online program. Would anyone like to, kind of demo it out and help me build it? And it was like fire. Yes, yes, yes. I want to, yes. And I was like, whoa, I'm really onto something here. And then the women did the challenge and they were like, thank you. And to this day, this is years later. I had a woman who lives on the Front Range near Denver, Colorado, 4 hours away from me. And she was like, listen, I want you to know I got a huge promotion. I'm now the sales director, and I want to thank you for that program because it really helped me step into who I needed to become to get to that next level in my career. So this was not within the HR profession. I created this program for women everywhere. And then they started telling their friends, and it had this amazing ripple effect. It was very organic and it just grew. And it didn't just grow where I live, it grew throughout the United States. So for me, I found something that I was so passionate about, empowering women, that it wasn't about running away from HR. It was finding something that I was really good at. My clients would say, you are meant to be a coach. This is so what you were meant to be. And I already knew that, but I'm not going to lie, that external validation really helped. So I was pulled towards something as opposed to running away from something. And that for me was a huge difference. It wasn't like the nitty gritty, oh, I don't like my boss. I don't like this unconscious bias. I don't like that my boss is doing this. It was, there is something bigger. And I felt a call to serve at a much higher level. And so I went with it. I went with it. And it's still serving me to this day. And it just continues to build momentum. And it's one of the coolest things I've ever experienced in my life.
Wow. That's amazing. That's like really tapping into kind of that something that you recognized was a need anyway,
Yes.
just collectively, but then really seeing how that tied into almost like what you needed or what you would have needed as,
Oh,
you know,
going back to what you said earlier, when
yeah,
you were working with a coach early on and looking in that mirror, you are meant to serve women just like you. And I
yeah,
feel the
yeah,
exact same way.
yeah.
I suffered with
Amazing.
imposter syndrome and I didn't see it. I talked about imposter syndrome at work all the time. I did not see my own, sorry, imposter syndrome, but also victim mentality. It's
Oh
both.
yeah.
It's a lot of things. The perfectionism, all the go 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 mentality. I mean, these are all things that I help women overcome those obstacles and get to the other side because I had to get to the other side. And when you get to the other side, Jen, I know you've experienced this because we've talked about it. When you get to the other side, I feel as though it's very natural for HR practitioners because we want to help so badly that
Mhm.
it's like, well, let me reach back over that obstacle and help these other women overcome that obstacle because there's no need for them to struggle if I know that I can help them. It's pretty
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. No, for sure.
What about you? What about you? I mean, did you?
So
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of like being able to look back on my career and my different times in HR and out of HR, I think one of the things that I've really been able to do is have better clarity around compartmentalizing the drama for drama's sake
Yes.
and really recognizing, am I here to serve for the right reasons? And so, in differentiating like whether or not our discontent is really related to the career or related to things that can be controlled, right? By just making
Yes.
different choices or, making that decision to leave or whatever. I think that that's really, we talk about this as we get into the end a little bit more, but I think when you start to kind of really like dig into it and say, well, what is this really about? Like, we were talking when we were doing prep just about a couple of things around victim mentality, because I think for me, and I know for you too, when I can look back at the 25-year-old self or 30-year-old self,
Yeah.
there was a lot of that. And it wasn't because, I was a bad person or anything like that. I
No.
think at that time, I just really, it was a lot of deflecting. It was a lot of projecting. It was a lot of outside of myself. It was a lot of ways of coping that had to do with just, pushing away. And that's where the drinking comes in, right? So there's so many things that you can look back. But now when I can be able to be really thoughtful about it, you can see, the different things that really were weighing on my shoulders were a-hole bosses or, things that really had
Yes.
to do with like, get the cojones within myself, like get that confidence within myself and find that courage to leave that environment. Because I think so
Mm.
often we get confused in our heads, as I was saying earlier, is that we think it's generally about the profession because we've had maybe bad luck,
Uh-huh.
within a few organizations with bosses who may not have been very sympathetic or organizations are not supportive. And so then that can start to feel very weighted. And so being able to compartmentalize it and being, kind of clear about, well, what exactly is it? And then what am I really doing here? Why am I wanting to kind of be in this career in the first place? And so I think that's something that I wish, these are tools I wish I could give that younger self of mine. But now I think it's exactly why you and I are in the position we are,
Yes.
to have
Yes.
this reflective power to be able to kind of see it so clearly, and then help people along that journey, whatever it looks like for them.
I totally agree. It's really truly not just giving lip service to that concept of this is happening to me versus for me. It's truly embodying it and being able to look back over, we've both been in the HR space for forever. And,
A minute.
it's, when I let go of 110 people, within a span of just a couple of months in 2007 and 2008, that didn't happen to me. That happened for me. That happened for those individuals. And it sounds so wild. And for our listeners, if you're having resistance to that, well, that's a bunch of BS. Of course, that's happening to them. A termination does happen. Just sit with that a little bit and sit with those thoughts, because those are just thoughts. And it can shift us into a disempowered spiral that goes down. Or if we truly, 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 truly believe, okay, this is happening for me. Maybe I can't see it right now, but I know things happen for me in my life. And this is happening because I've got a lesson here. I've got something to learn. And there is something greater happening for me.
Damn,
And
girl.
it's a mindset. And your mindset can either disempower you or it can empower you. And
Yeah.
it's all in how you see it. I'm not saying that shitty things don't happen. This isn't about putting rose-colored glasses on. It is about a termination is a termination, no matter what side of the table you're on. And we can choose to say, okay, there's something in here. There is something in here to learn from and to grow from and to catapult me to whatever's next. Kind of
100%.
wild. I never would have believed it. Never would have believed that even, 6-7 years ago. Just
Yeah.
didn't have the ability to see the difference between victim mentality and victor mentality. Didn't see it.
Whoa. Yeah, that's good. And, for any of our listeners who haven't had a chance to hear or listen or watch last Wednesday, the conversation that holy manoli, Catherine and I had about me getting terminated a year ago, and
Yes.
the reflections that, we've been able to have. I mean, so much of what you said just now was fire. It would have been so good,
Yeah.
a few days ago. But I think, it's so powerful to remind ourselves that at any time it's available to us to shift our mindset.
Anytime.
And I think that that's where it's really hard. It can be really tough for people. And so as coaches, we have to just be there for people to kind of allow for that, when they're ready, or, when that openness comes for them to be able to kind of walk into that, because that's where I think, all of you out there have heard us say it, and you'll hear us say it again and again and again. You've got to feel it to heal it, and so
Yeah.
it's really about, once you become more aware of what it was that perhaps we're holding on to and having difficulty letting go, you can then let it go.
Let it
And
go.
so it's just a matter of really being willing to kind of go into that fire a little bit more. And then it kind of opens us up in so much bigger ways and we never knew possible. So, all right, well, let's shift it a little bit and let's talk about misconceptions. So for you, Catherine, what are the most common misconceptions that you've seen about people leaving the HR field? And what are different ways that you can debunk those misconceptions?
I see this time and time again with other HR consultants. So women who've left, quote unquote, the HR profession and have shifted into an HR consultancy role. When women leave in that way, and they leave angry, mad, pissed off, as my father would say, and I'm sure this comes from someone else, but in my ears, when I hear this quote, it's my dad saying it. So, I mean, there's just so much love in it. Wherever you go, there you are. And I feel as though if a lot of times we think, oh, well, if I just leave, things are going to be better. There's not going to be burnout. There's not going to be overwhelm. I'm going to have so much time. I'm going to suddenly have boundaries. I'm going to suddenly be able to say no to things. And those things don't necessarily change. You know, I have had so many clients stay in the profession. I've had so many coaching clients leave the profession, but it's really getting down to the fundamentals of why you want to leave and the things that we do need to let go of in order to propel us forward. So I think people think, I mean, just that traditional, the grass is going to be greener. The grass is going to be greener. But what is that quote that you have to water the grass where you are, or something like that? I think it's just really important to take the time to see why you're actually leaving the HR field. And I think that's one of just the greatest misconceptions, because I do see fellow HR consultants, they're still angry because they left thinking it was going to be different, and they're still struggling in their turmoil. They're still struggling in their victim mentality. They're still struggling with overwhelming imposter syndrome. And I really think it's important to do that work so that you're thriving. Whether it's you know, going into HR consultancy, most of my clients end up shifting in that direction versus totally leaving and becoming a massage therapist, or, you know, something totally outside of the home skills, you know, whether it's becoming a mediator or something like that. I really do believe it's critical to look at those fundamental skills of confidence, of self-worth, of curiosity, and make sure that you're developing those skill sets before you just decide to leave. Because chances are developing those fundamental skills will help you move towards something instead of running away.
Nice. That was, I got chills. I mean, that was so beautiful. And just so relevant, I think, to what I experienced, and I think so many others, like, you know, that sense of, you know, if I make this change, it's gonna be better, you know, it'll get better. And
Yes.
without really the recognition of the thing that's going on internally that's actually creating that disconnect, right? That discontent, that, you know, self-loathing, or, you know, lack of
Yes.
worth, or lack of self-belief of thinking you're good enough. And like, if that's
Yes.
hovering under the surface, you're kind of apt, you know, wherever
You say
you
you're kind of
go.
fucked.
Yeah. Well, I said you're kind of apt for the children, Catherine. No,
Put
I'm
put the
kidding.
headphones on the kiddos for this one.
I mean, you really are. And so it's so funny, because when we talk about what are the common misconceptions, our next question is about a success story. So I think I'm going to skip. I'm going to wait to talk about the common misconception, because it's all
Well,
about my.
go into that. I want to
Okay.
hear.
All right. The next question that we have is like, share a success story of a client who contemplated leaving HR, but found renewed passion and purpose within the profession. So this gets me emotional, because one of the things that I was doing when I was, when I was doing one-on-one coaching, was really doing, you know, an assessment at the time that you start working with somebody. What's really going on? Trying to open the hood a little bit, right? And what we found right away is that, the gal that I was working with was so ready in her mind to get out of HR. She was so unhappy. She was so burned out. She was everything that you were talking about. So as you were talking and my goosebumps were going all crazy,
You're
it's
like, wait,
because
were you one of my clients?
like, I didn't think it was her, but it might, yeah. So it's so wild. But anyway, so same freaking thing, same thing is like so burnt out, so overwhelmed. And one of the things I did with her from the very beginning when we did our intake was, I want you to make a commitment. And she was totally down for it because she could see, it was almost like by the end of even our first hour together, a light was starting to turn on, and she, like, it started to click. It's like, how when they say the lights on but no one's home, it's like
Yes.
for her, you could see from the very beginning she was ready. And I think anyone who's ever done coaching or been in coaching or even therapy, right, like when you're ready, when you're ready. And for this gal, she was ready for the coaching. She wasn't ready yet for the mindset shift
Yeah.
around what was about to happen. So what we did at the end of that first session when she was ready is I said, hey, what I want you to do is promise not to leave. Don't send out your resume. Just wait these 6 weeks. It was a 6-week program. I'm like, come on, we can do it. What do you think? And she's like, yes, we're going to. Okay. And sure enough, at the end of that 6 weeks, not only was she like wanting to stay within her role, she was ready for growth for the first time in like years because she felt so like self-limited in so many ways. And there was like so many things happening under that hood, under the surface, that when she really uncovered them and realized the lack of confidence, the lack of self-belief, the lack of self-love, oh, the heavy lack of self-care,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
All of that was happening. She not only stayed within HR, she got that promotion. So it's one of my favorite success stories because I think when it comes to our lives, sometimes our marriages, our jobs, we tend to do that. It's a human thing. I can't remember the name of it. They just brought it up in the TED Talk, one of the TED Talks the other day. But it's a very human thing where we continuously are thinking that things will get better once that, change happens. But the reality of it is it's all within us at all times. And yes, you can make that change. You could still make that change. And, had the circumstances been different where she was in a toxic environment where she was being mistreated, one of the things about environments where people may be in that are unhealthy, toxic, all of those, those types of elements that tend to come up. I know with you and with me, Catherine, when we work with clients, is like those are the big things that when we finally get to a place of self-worth and we recognize how worthy we are, we're never going to put up with mistreatment, right? You would never put up with the mistreatment of others when you believe in yourself, when you love yourself, right?
Mm.
And I can say that for any relationship anybody listening or watching has ever had in their lives. And so that's what we do. And I think where the success stories kind of really become magical is when people realize their worthiness and then make that change for the right reasons, like you said earlier, and not because you're running away from something that actually was yours to shift all along. So
Mhm.
that's my success story. Top that, girl.
Oh, I don't know if I can top that necessarily. I know it's a matter of speech. I'm just teasing. I'm totally teasing. Um, boy, I mean, it's so funny because when we do these podcasts, I always have an idea of what I'm going to share, but as you were speaking, my mind, and this happens a lot, my mind just starts to go and it starts to blow up. And I was literally flashing back as you were sharing to all of the different clients I have served,
Mm,
especially since leaving my 9 to 5 role. I always had that sort of pro bono side hustle going on. But since I formally started my business as a coach and consultant, I mean, I am thinking about all of the women who have left, have gone and not left HR, excuse me. I've had several clients do that and they're very, very successful, but I have so many clients who have stayed in their exact role. And like you said, just started shifting their mindset a little bit, shifting how they're approaching work, shifting how they're showing up.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
almost always, it's about
Almost.
relationships at work. It's consternation with the boss. So the Gallup poll, the Gallup poll that measures, do you have a best friend at work? All the autonomy questions, and we always talk about people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses,
Mhm.
and that has absolutely proven to be true when I'm working with clients. And most of my clients seek me out for coaching when they're either ready to freaking quit or they think they're about to get fired.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not surprising, right? Because we don't want to go through that transition alone, especially if we feel like I'm about to get fired. This is happening to me. And people obviously don't want to work with me if they're, like, yeah, I've got it. I've got the mindset thing. If I get fired, so be it. I'm ready for the next thing. It's really the people who are coming from fear, Jen, like what you were saying. And they're
Mhm.
so afraid they're about to be fired and they're just holding on for dear life. And I
Mhm.
have had clients be let go when we're in the middle of my 12 week, my program's a year long, but initially I work with women once a week for 12 weeks. And I've had several be let go during that process. And we've obviously done a lot of mindset work when that does happen. And it's so critical to shift them out of that victim mentality, to see that
Mhm.
it's happened for them, to see that there was a lesson to be learned here and what's
Mhm.
next. You've now been released. What is next? What are you looking forward to? That whole analogy that your windshield is a lot bigger than your rearview mirror. So when we
Mhm.
look at the past, sure, use that skill of reflection, look back, learn, but what lies ahead? And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of coaching. What are you looking toward? And that is so hugely important. But gosh, I just went all over the place. To answer your question, I do have one client in particular who was really struggling with her boss. She was in the hospitality field, just really struggling, a lot of consternation, a lot of butting heads. She was ready to leave. She was ready to leave the HR profession. She was having a lot of success with her side hustle, doing resume coaching, doing all of these things related to HR, but more in a consultancy role. It turned out that she was recruited by a recruiter, and I can't even remember the exponential salary bump that she received. It was huge, but most importantly, it was a cultural fit. And she found a team of people who love her and
Mhm.
she loves them. So sometimes I feel as though it's not necessarily, when we're thinking I need to leave, is it really about achievement or is it about alignment? Sometimes it's both. In her case, it was a step up. She's now doing HR for multiple states, but it was also an alignment piece. So I think younger when we're a little bit younger in our careers, sometimes we're just striving for that achievement. And then other times it's, I actually want values alignment here. And sometimes it's both. So in that particular case, it was both. She is thriving. I actually had a coworker of hers reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, I just found out that you were so and so's coach. I just want to let you know that we are so grateful for the work you did. She is such an amazing HR person, and she talks about you all the time." And that to me was just like, thank you for that external validation, but it doesn't matter. I'm just so happy for her. Like I think as a coach, it's your client who does the work. And you're using your skills to facilitate them to whatever's next for them, which is really fun.
And, like in the HR field, you can take that same mindset approach to how we serve our employees, right? Like our win is to see them win.
Yes.
When we thrive, we see them thrive. So like
Yes.
all of that can be applied to both the coaching that you do for the people in HR,
Yes.
but also what we in HR do for our peeps. So like having that mindset in mind actually can be
Love that.
such an empowering thing,
I
I
love
think,
that, Jen.
for our listeners and viewers. So, okay, you ready for the last question?
Uh-huh.
Okay. What advice do you have for HR professionals who feel stuck or disillusioned in their careers but aren't sure where to begin in terms of exploring alternatives?
What advice do I have?
Mhm.
Slow down, and make sure you are running toward something. Identify your own vision. What do you want to be experiencing? And start putting a plan together to move toward that. Would just be my advice. First and foremost, slow down. Because when my clients come to me saying, I want to hire you as my coach, they're like coming from fight, flight, fear, or fawn. I mean, most of them are like, I need out, I need out, I need out. Slow down, get some help. I'm actually teaching. So, the podcast is different. This is where you and I just get to talk about our past. But I teach HR and Power Hour, so I'm teaching something that is very similar to what I teach with imposter syndrome. So I'm teaching sort of this three-pronged model tomorrow. So for any of the listeners who are like, I'm feeling stuck, what do I actually do about it? Come to HR and Power Hour tomorrow. And for those of you who are in Denver and are members of the Mile High SHRM chapter, I'm actually teaching it live in person on May 15th. So if you happen to be in Denver and you're a member of the Mile High chapter, I'm teaching it in person. But if that's not you and you're like, oh, I really want to do something about it, I don't want to just talk about it anymore, I need some tangibles, I need a tool, come to HR and Power Hour tomorrow, 12 o'clock Mountain Time. And I got a good tool for you.
Right on. Well, and if they miss HR Power Hour, you have so many other things that are available for women in HR to look into. So we'll make sure to put just your information in the show notes as we do, so people can reach out if it's past the HR Power Hour day.
Totally. Yeah, they're recorded for a reason. So yeah.
Awesome.
What about you? What advice do you have if someone's super stuck and disillusioned in their career right now?
I think what you said is like so spot on, is to slow down and to really check in with it. I mean, what a beautiful opportunity. It's like I find like at this time in my life, I'm always trying to look for opportunities and things. And when you had said something about, how it's here for you, those feelings that aren't going away of being unhappy or discontented, those need time to like actually sit in. I
Yes.
think sometimes we
Yes.
have, years can go by and we don't really take the time. I mean, it comes up and we have those moments, those bursts of frustration, and we're feeling
Yeah.
it, or, when we're overwhelmed, and then it's gone and then it comes and goes. But how often do we actually slow down enough to really ask ourselves the important and critical questions? And that doesn't need coaching. It doesn't need therapy. It doesn't actually need anything other than your own damn self and the time to carve out. And so that is 100% my advice, is find what works for you, but don't
Mm.
allow another year to go by without really spending that time with yourself around what
Ugh,
it is that's missing and what you need. And
yes.
so, yeah, and seek the support that you do need. Catherine is like amazing. There's so many different amazing support systems out there, regardless of,
100%.
what's comfortable for one person to another. I think it's just a matter of starting and actually
Mm.
starting to take those first steps to do that inventory that is not going away.
Right.
It's not going away. And so the best gift you can ever do for yourself is to try to really take that time to say, okay, what am I meant to like learn about myself through this experience? And how can I, grow from this? And so you had said it so much better than I am right now earlier, but I think that for me is absolutely it.
I
So
love that. I love that. Yeah, you don't have to blow out your knee
no,
to do an inventory.
no, you
Doesn't
don't
have to
have
be that
to.
way.
But for a lot of people, I mean, I know I talked with someone who said when she got COVID, it was like the best week of her life. And
Totally.
she said she sat down, she really, I mean, take those
Yes.
opportunities if they do come up, but you don't need a blown knee or COVID to really be able to spend that time, because that is like one of the most loving things you can ever do for yourself.
Yes.
Right? If you really wanna talk about how to love yourself more and how to really, like, show up for yourself more, this, right? Like, to really check in and be honest with yourself about the discontentment, right there. And then it's like, "Okay, what am I gonna do about it?" Versus, like you said, that victim mentality, but how do I actually use this as a tool for good for my own life? And that is like the reframing that is like the superpower. So
Yeah.
reach out, anyone listening or watching, to Catherine, to myself, to any other people out there, if you need any support or tools. So with that, we are going to wrap up today. Hey, everybody, please make sure if you like what we're throwing out there, make sure to download this podcast. Make sure to like it, review it, give us your love. We are so excited to be at episode 14 and just want to keep making this thing grow and grow and grow. And with that, thank you so much, Catherine. And we're going to sign off and remind everybody out there, every day is such a great day to thrive and shine in HR. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Bye.